In the kingdom of Lithuania, at a military camp near Perdium County, a young man awoke in a state of utter shock. He was stunned by what had happened to him, holding his neck and gasping for breath. He couldn't believe he was still alive. He vividly remembered having just been defeated and killed in an unjust war. In that war, he recalled losing a duel and being grievously wounded by Aiden, one of the continent's 7 finest noble knights. Aiden had smiled cynically, remarking that this was the end for Gislin Perdium, the mercenary king and one of the 7 strongest men on the continent. Aiden declared the war over and asked Gislin if he had any last words as he pointed his sword at the kneeling man. Gislin, breathing heavily, replied that he had none, only regretting his failure to get revenge and cursing Aiden. Aiden was surprised to see Gislin still acting arrogant despite being near death. He then revealed that he knew Gislin was the eldest son of the fallen noble house of Perdium, who had left his family after his sister's death. Gislin, annoyed and curious, demanded to know how someone from another kingdom could know that. Aiden explained that he had worked for a long time to track Gislin down and, most importantly, that it was they who had collaborated with the Delphine house to destroy Gislin's family. Gislin was shocked to hear the word "we," never imagining someone else besides the Duke of Delphine was behind his family's destruction. Before he could recover from the shock, Aiden pressed his sword to Gislin's neck, stating that there was no point in explaining further since he was about to die and should accept his fate. Gislin exploded in rage at the realization that the enemy before him was responsible for his family's ruin, screaming that he would never forgive him. Those were his last words, as Aiden then mercilessly swung his sword, beheading Gislin and sealing his dark fate. Now, Gislin looked at his reflection in a basin of water, fully aware that his neck should have been severed. What surprised him, besides being alive, was that his face looked younger. He wondered if it was all a hallucination or if he had been captured and was being used as a test subject by a mage. As he contemplated killing whoever was experimenting on him, a man entered his tent, calling for the young master to come out, knowing he was awake. Gislin recognized the man as Ricardo, a Perdium soldier. To confirm his suspicions, Gislin deliberately put Ricardo in a chokehold with his sword from behind. Instead of being scared, Ricardo pushed him away and irritably explained that Gislin had fallen asleep after throwing a tantrum for not being accepted as a commander for a raid on orc monsters. Ricardo, tired of explaining to the disbelieving Gislin, urged him to pack up as others were waiting outside the tent. Gislin, puzzled, asked where they were going. Ricardo replied that they were going home to Perdium County. Startled, Gislin grabbed Ricardo's shoulders and demanded he repeat himself, asking if he meant the Perdium County that had been destroyed. Shortly after, Gislin stood on a cliff outside the camp, overlooking Perdium Castle. He couldn't believe the castle was still intact when he clearly remembered it being razed to the ground. Hearing Ricardo warn him to be careful and never mention Perdium's fall in front of the count, he pinched his cheek hard, but the pain was too real for a dream. Putting together all the strange occurrences from his younger face to the intact Perdium territory, Gislin suspected he had returned to the past. In his past, he had hated his own family. He was immature and caused trouble due to his inferiority complex. Over time, most people in the Perdium noble house distanced themselves from him. Unable to bear the criticism, Gislin ran away from home and became a mercenary a few years later. He survived countless battles, honing his skills until he became famous. But by the time he returned to Perdium to atone for his past mistakes, it had already been reduced to dust. At that time, Gislin regretted losing everything. But now, seeing with his own eyes that everything and everyone he loved still existed along with Perdium, his face filled with emotion. Overcome with joy and disbelief, Gislin chuckled to himself, which bewildered Ricardo. However, Gislin knew it was too early to celebrate. This second chance came with the burden of changing a destiny he must alter with his sword and determination. Recalling Ricardo's mention of the orc raid, Gislin thought to himself that he remembered this day as when most of the raid party would die. In his past life, he had joined the orc raid to gain rank and prestige. The report had stated there were only 3 orcs, which he thought would be easy for someone like him, who had no experience leading troops. But upon arrival, there were over 20 orcs. Almost everyone died because of his foolish desire to lead the squad. He believed defeating them should be possible now, as orcs lacked battle strategy, but he questioned if anyone would believe him, given his reputation as a useless bum. Suddenly, a wooden watchtower flew over Gislin, shocking him. The soldiers screamed hysterically that the orc monsters were attacking their camp. Gislin was even more shocked to see the orcs storming their defenses, as this had not happened in the past. Seeing many soldiers being thrown by the monsters, the raid squad commander, Skovin, shouted for them to form a defensive formation and not to panic. Skovin, running from a camp, was stopped as he had to block a charge from a large orc monster. He panicked, breaking into a cold sweat, frustrated by the surprise attack when his troops were not ready. He thought to himself about how there were more orcs than reported and that they would all die if this continued. Suddenly, Skovin was startled by someone shouting for him to look behind him. Indeed, an orc had raised its axe high to strike the commander without mercy. But before the monster could swing, Gislin dashed in like lightning, pushing the commander back, which greatly surprised him. To Skovin's shock, his young master faced the monster and, without hesitation, delivered a powerful upper slash that horrifically severed the monster's leg and right arm. Everyone there, from the commander to the entire troop who witnessed it, stared with wide eyes and open mouths at their young master being able to injure a large orc so severely. As the orc fell to the ground from a single swing, Gislin was still disappointed that he couldn't use mana yet. But that one slash instantly changed the troop's perception of him. He was no longer the same young man. Afterward, he approached Skovin and demanded that he be given command of the raid. The commander, Skovin, still sitting on the ground, frowned, wrestling with a mix of fear and admiration. He thought it was foolish for Gislin to ask for command while all their soldiers were risking their lives. Skovin got up heavily, looked away, and stated he couldn't do it, trying to hide his surging anxiety. Gislin was surprised by the refusal. Skovin stepped away and asserted that war was not a game, and even though Gislin was the young master, he couldn't just hand over the command given to him by the count. Hearing this, Gislin fell silent, feeling anger and frustration, but admitted to himself that he would have reacted the same way if some fool suddenly demanded control of the troops. Suddenly, a deafening roar cut through the air as a giant orc with a blood-red face and sharp tusks charged at them with burning rage. Though startled, Skovin shouted for them to fall back, saying he would handle it and that Gislin was too young to lead. However, Gislin, with a fiery gaze and unwavering determination, raised his sword, stating that it seemed he had no other choice. In an instant, he threw his sword, which surprised Skovin as it nearly hit his head. Skovin grabbed Gislin's collar, furiously and confusedly asking what he was doing. Gislin remained silent, letting Skovin see for himself what was happening. The sword flew towards the giant orc, piercing the weak spot on its forehead. It let out a hysterical roar before collapsing with a thud, splattering blood everywhere. Skovin was stunned, wondering how he had managed to hit the weak spot so precisely. Before Skovin could recover from his shock, Gislin looked at him coldly and asked if his name was Skovin and if he knew the most important thing on the battlefield. The question left the commander speechless, his expression turning to bewilderment. In the distance, the soldiers were trembling with fear as the orcs continued their relentless attack. Gislin told Skovin they couldn't hope to win while their troops were frozen in fear. What they needed was momentum. Instantly, with agile and powerful movements, Gislin leaped and struck the orcs blocking his path. In one high jump, he stabbed the head of an orc terrorizing the Perdium troops with deadly precision. Both the Perdium soldiers and Skovin were shocked by Gislin's reckless actions, but his frenzy didn't stop there. He roared for the orcs to come at him, vowing to finish them all. Without hesitation, Gislin charged forward, relentlessly slashing at every orc in his path. The sound of clashing swords and the hysterical screams of orcs filled the battlefield as Gislin moved like a shadow, merciless and unending. Commander Scoven, who was initially doubtful, was now stunned and began to realize that there was something different about Gislin. He wondered if he was dreaming, as even a mana user like himself struggled against them. So how could this skinny young master do it? Scoven knew Gislin's body was exhausted, but he was amazed to see his movements remain agile, using the momentum of his sword swings to strike the orc's weak points. He fought like a sword master without mana, or perhaps even someone more skilled. With a burning spirit, Gislin taunted the orcs, asking if this was all they had, as he wasn't even warmed up and they were unworthy of being called a warrior species. He then quickly ran away from the orcs. As the monsters blindly chased him, the Perdium troops grew confused and anxious. One of them shouted to the commander that the orcs were all rushing towards the young master. Hearing this, Scoven panicked, wondering what Gislin was thinking as he watched the situation intently. Scoven knew that Gislin entering the enemy lines and successfully diverting their attention was good, but he was confused as to why he was now running away. Scoven's mind drifted to a view in the distance, the edge of a high cliff, a dangerous place for a battle. He whispered to himself, realizing there was a cliff in that direction. He muttered the word cliff with bated breath, his face turning pale as a realization dawned on him. Without waiting any longer, Scoven immediately shouted for his troops to form a shield wall and follow the first sun. Meanwhile, the enraged red orcs relentlessly chased Gislin, who continued to flee towards the cliff's edge. Once there, Gislin parried all their attacks and thought to himself that if Scoven was a competent commander, he would already know his plan. Although he wanted to finish them all himself, his current stamina couldn't keep up. The rumbling footsteps of the Perdium army approached the cliff, startling the orcs. Seeing Scoven and his troops charging in formation with shields and spears, Gislin smiled, uttered the word perfect, and suddenly leaped off the cliff. With a single word from Gislin, now, Scoven unhesitatingly bellowed for his troops to push the orcs off the cliff. With a unified charge, Scoven's troops mercilessly shoved the cornered orcs off the edge, sending them to their deaths at the bottom of a deep chasm. After defeating the orcs, the soldiers, breathing heavily, exchanged victorious cheers for their success. However, Scoven, knowing Gislin had also jumped, immediately screamed the young master's name at the cliff's edge. Gislin had managed to survive the fall by hanging from his sword, which had embedded into the cliff wall. Seeing this, Scoven smiled in relief and extended his hand to help Gislin back up. But suddenly, Gislin's grip on his sword loosened. He had run out of stamina to support his own body weight. As a result, he fell into the deep abyss, causing Scoven and his troops to scream in unison for the young master. At the edge of this ravine, life and death mingled, marking the beginning of a tougher struggle. Gislin's vision went dark, and he awoke in his subconscious, hearing and seeing fragmented memories of his younger sister, Elena. The memories alternated between sadness and happiness, from Elena grieving their mother's death to her joy with Gislin and their arguments. But the memory that left the deepest trauma for Gislin was Elena, with teary eyes, pulling him to go somewhere with her. That trauma was also what woke him up in his room with a compress on his forehead. Gislin couldn't believe he was still alive after falling into the chasm and was grateful that Scoven's troops had saved him. But his mind was now in turmoil, wondering if the memory of Elena was just a dream. While feeling pain all over his body from overexerting himself in the orc fight, the door opened and a young woman entered quickly, asking if the master was awake. The woman was Belinda, Gislin's loyal personal maid. Gislin looked at her with confused eyes and softly said her name. Belinda smiled gently, but then spoke with a serious tone, asking if he knew how worried she was and reminding him she had told him to let the soldiers fight the orcs. Suddenly, without warning, Gislin hugged Belinda tightly, surprising her. He simply said he was just happy to see her again. Belinda had been his loyal personal maid since childhood, regardless of his foolish behavior. However, after the Perdium family was destroyed and Gislin disappeared, He never saw her again until his death at Aiden's hands. Ghislain honestly never thought they would meet again in such a peaceful setting. Belinda smiled and asked why he was so happy when they saw each other every day. False tranquility, the shadow of disaster began to loom over Perdium. Instead of answering, Ghislain decided he had to tell Belinda the truth. Holding her shoulders tightly, he told her to listen carefully, as a disaster was about to shake Perdium. Belinda, bewildered, asked what he meant. Ghislain answered firmly that he had actually died and come back to life. Belinda paused, then replied lightly that she was sure the orcs had nearly finished him off. Ghislain tried to correct her, but Belinda believed that he, not Perdium, was the one in danger. She even lectured him not to play at being a commander, which frustrated Ghislain as his attempts to convince her failed completely. Seeing Ghislain still acting childishly, Belinda added what he would have done if he couldn't attend the festival. Ghislain was taken aback by the mention of a festival. Belinda smiled, asking if he had forgotten that Lady Elena had been waiting for the festival day to go with him, adding that it would be a good chance for them to mend their relationship, showing him a photo of the two of them. Holding the photo with his sister, Ghislain remembered there was a festival every year around this time. In his previous life, he had missed the festival due to a traumatic experience. When Ghislain asked when the festival was, Belinda said it would start in a week. Ghislain's mood instantly grew tense. He knew that 1 week from now would be a day that drastically changed his life. A soft voice came from the slowly opening door, asking if her brother was inside. Ghislain looked towards the door, once again recalling the memory that haunted him. He remembered how in the past, Elena had earnestly asked him to go with her, which turned out to be to the festival. Now, Ghislain looked at his sister with a bitter expression, thinking to himself that Elena would die at that festival next week. Without warning, Ghislain hugged his sister tightly, causing both Elena and Belinda to blush in confusion. Elena shyly asked him what was wrong and what kind of joke this was. Ghislain gently replied that he missed her, but Elena, feeling disgusted, quickly pushed her brother towards Belinda. This shocked Ghislain, as he couldn't believe his little sister had the strength to push him. Elena was not happy with her brother acting so clingy, especially since he had recently called her disgusting names. Ghislain then remembered that he had indeed been a terrible brother and was not close to his sister in the past. Feeling guilty, he immediately apologized, which spontaneously shocked both Belinda and Elena, who had never seen him apologize before. Elena even thought her brother had completely changed because he had been hit on the head by an orc. Ghislain defended himself, saying he had defeated the orcs, not been beaten by them. But when a sudden wave of pain hit him, Ghislain crumpled to the floor, shaking, which made Belinda and Elena laugh in bewilderment. Their laughter, however, meant the world to Ghislain. He thought to himself that everything was just as he remembered and wondered why his past self had wasted so much time on unimportant things. At the festival next week, he had refused Elena's invitation to go together, using the orc attack as an excuse for being sad. That was the last day he saw her. Elena's body was later found torn to pieces, along with her guards. With regret and anger, he thought he should have gone with her. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and 2 guards named Jamal and Philip entered. They were looking for Elena and informed her that the servants needed her help to check their work on the festival equipment. Ghislain was surprised that the servants were asking Elena for help. Belinda, slightly annoyed, replied that the young master wouldn't know anything since he was always lazy. The truth was, Perdium was so short on manpower that even the young lady had to pitch in. Ghislain realized that in the past, he never cared about such things, so it was natural he didn't know. Not wanting his sister to work alone, Ghislain told her as she was leaving that he would help too. This statement moved Elena so much her face flushed. Consequently, Belinda and Elena were again shocked by his sudden change, becoming convinced his head must have been hit by the orcs. Soon, they arrived at the festival area, but most people were scared to see Ghislain there to help. Annoyed, Elena pushed her brother away, telling him that if he wanted to help, he shouldn't get close to the workers. Despite being pushed away, Ghislain remembered that Elena's body had been found near a slum area, far from the festival grounds. He was certain someone had either called her there or forced her to go. To prevent that from happening again, Ghislain knew he had to investigate the castle's interior and exterior to rule out all worst-case scenarios. As Elena was shooing Ghislain away, someone ran up from behind, calling his name. It was Old Man Fergus, Ghislain's personal guard, who was worried after hearing about the orc incident. Elena was glad Fergus arrived just in time and asked the old man to take her strange brother back to his room. Annoyed at losing a crucial opportunity to investigate, Ghislain knew he had to find another way to learn about the castle's condition within the week. Instead of going back to his room, Ghislain asked Fergus to take him to the training ground, which he believed had been neglected. Fergus, bewildered, asked why he wanted to go to the training grounds. With great determination, Ghislain replied that he wanted to train. Now it was Fergus's turn to be shocked by his young master's change in attitude. Moments later, they arrived at the training ground, and Ghislain's eyes widened in disbelief. The field he thought was abandoned looked impeccable. It was even better than any training ground he had used as a mercenary. Fergus admitted he had been maintaining the place just in case the young master wanted to use it. Fergus believed Ghislain's laziness was just a passing phase of teenage rebellion, so he had kept the training ground in good condition, ready for Ghislain to use whenever he needed it. Hearing this, Ghislain was shocked, never realizing that Fergus had sincerely cared for the ground in the past without his knowledge. Ghislain stood silent for a moment, reflecting on his past foolishness when there were people around him who were loyal and sincere. He then patted the old man's shoulder, saying he needed a long life because death tasted so bitter. Fergus, puzzled, remarked that the master spoke as if he had already experienced life and death. Ghislain admitted that he had, but Fergus didn't believe him, taking it as a joke. Not wanting to waste any more time, Ghislain asked Fergus to leave as he wanted to start training immediately. After Fergus left, Ghislain thought to himself that he had always treated everyone around him as enemies, but his perspective had been too narrow. He pictured the sincere smiles Belinda, Elena, and Fergus had recently given him. Ghislain remembered that in the past, a week from now, the culprit behind Elena's death was revealed to be a nobleman from a neighboring territory. This led to a war that ended in Perdium's destruction. Ghislain understood that Elena's death was the key event that started the end of the Perdium family. This meant he had to correct everything, starting by preventing his sister's death. With a burning determination, Ghislain immediately sat down to cultivate in the middle of the field. He felt he had to master mana control, as it could be developed faster than physical strength, which required time. As he absorbed the supernatural energy around him, Ghislain was confident he could quickly strengthen his body beyond human limits, as he had been able to absorb that energy easily before, even in the chaos of a battlefield. After gathering and rotating the mana particles like a pinwheel, Ghislain easily created his mana core in a short time. But one mana core was not enough to make him one of the 7 strongest on the continent. So he used a method from a half-burnt magic book he had once acquired, allowing him to create 2 and then even 3 mana cores, forming a network connecting them. A sudden explosion of power from the mana cores caused him immense pain, making him vomit a lot of blood from his mouth and nose. Ghislain coughed and gasped, disappointed that his limit was only 3 mana cores, whereas he could previously reach 5. This method allowed for a burst of power in a short time, but in exchange, it required a large amount of mana. This was the main reason he had lost to Aiden in his previous life. Aiden had brought an entire knightly order to fight Ghislain when he was out of mana. If the fight had been fair, Ghislain was sure he would have beaten Aiden. Ghislain didn't care that the technique was unstable. The power it generated was sufficient for now. Wiping the blood from his mouth, he thought to himself that it was fine, as he now had a young body and plenty of time to train. He vowed that it was now his turn to cut off Aiden's head, as well as the heads of the bastards behind the Delphine family who helped destroy his territory. He vowed to destroy them all. A week passed, and the night of the festival arrived. The festival, which should have been joyous, now became the stage for an inevitable prelude to destruction. Elena was seen in a cold sweat, shocked that her brother actually came to accompany her to the festival. Although Elena commented that her brother's change was too drastic and mocked his previously childish attitude, she honestly liked the new him. Smiling sweetly, she remarked that the old him seemed to have returned, which made Ghislain pause for a moment. In his silence, Ghislain realized something over the past week. Because his actions and attitude had completely changed, the way people saw him and his future were also slowly beginning to change. Ghislain was sure that major events would unfold similarly, but it was difficult to know the impact of his decisions on smaller events. His current task was to use his knowledge of the future effectively and respond to every situation. For this reason, he had prepared everything he needed in a pouch hanging from his belt. Finally, Elena took Ghislain all over, enjoying the festival night to the fullest. She admitted to being a little bored because the festival events were the same every year. What made Ghislain tense and puzzled, however, was that the festival was almost over, yet nothing suspicious had happened. He wondered if it was because he was with Elena. Suddenly, Ghislain was startled by the sound of someone approaching, asking if the lady wanted to check out another area. The person, who was one of her guards, claimed a friend had told him about a new event elsewhere and suggested they go see it. Elena, completely unsuspicious, was thrilled and immediately agreed to go with him. But Ghislain stood still, staring intently at the man who had invited Elena. Ghislain said to himself that it was them, the traitors from their house. The main traitors behind Elena's death in the past were her two personal guards, Jamal and Philip. Elena's guards, Jamal and Philip, were the most trusted in the kingdom, having protected her since she was a child. In Ghislain's previous life, they were reported to have died protecting Elena with their lives, but the reality was the opposite. A moment later, all of them, including Ghislain, arrived in a deserted slum area with no one around. Elena was immediately puzzled, wondering what kind of festival this was in such a squalid place. Jamal made an excuse that the performers were getting ready and would arrive soon. But Ghislain, looking at the surroundings, was certain this place had been planned as an ambush site, evidenced by all the blocked escape routes. Annoyed that there was nothing there, Elena urged her brother to leave. But Philip immediately blocked Elena, telling her to wait a little longer with a face holding back anger. Elena was frightened, as she had never seen Philip act like that before. Feeling that he couldn't stall any longer and had already scared Elena, Jamal said with a cunning smile that he didn't mean to frighten the young lady, but a rather reasonable request had come their way. As Elena was shocked by the word request, footsteps approached from behind Jamal, revealing three mysterious figures in hooded cloaks. Their leader in the middle, named Frank, complimented them on a job well done. Jamal greeted Frank, stating that he had brought the young lady as requested and asked to finalize their negotiation. Frank, however, was slightly surprised, asking why they also brought Perdium's eldest son, as that was not part of the deal. Jamal said he was offering the eldest son for free, adding with a sly smile that he had foolishly followed them, unaware that this would be his grave. Hearing this, Ghislain told Jamal that he had betrayed them and asked if he thought he could get away with it. Jamal laughed and told Ghislain to worry about himself first, as they planned to flee far away from the poor Perdium County, which they were tired of, especially with the constant trouble from orcs and barbarians. He added that he was sure many other Perdium citizens had already fled besides them. Suddenly, with a flash of a mana-clad sword, Ghislain struck, piercing Jamal's armor and slicing his body diagonally. Jamal's eyes widened in an instant of excruciating pain, unable to react at all. A single sound, was his final utterance before he was gruesomely split in two, shocking everyone present. As the executioner, Ghislain retorted that at least the others never betrayed and sold them out. He then glared at Philip with a terrifying intimidation that frightened him immensely. Philip quickly grabbed Elena, ready to draw his sword, and cursed Jamal for being a fool, wondering how a knight could lose to an amateur. Suddenly, Ghislain's mana-clad sword flew swiftly and embedded itself in Philip's forehead, killing him instantly as he uttered his last word, "Impossible." The betrayal from within their own house opened a new, merciless chapter of revenge. As Ghislaine hugged Elena to protect her, Frank's two subordinates were in a cold sweat, doubting that the person before them was really Perdium's eldest son. According to reports, the eldest son had no combat experience or even basic training. Frank himself was sure that the person's appearance matched the eldest son's. But what shocked him was that even though the two guards were careless, Ghislaine had managed to dispatch them instantly. Moreover, Frank clearly saw Ghislaine use mana to kill them. Seeing Elena trembling with fear, Ghislaine was forced to strike her neck to knock her unconscious. After laying Elena on the ground, Frank thanked Ghislaine for lightening their task, noting he was very different from what he had heard. Frank admitted they had planned to get rid of the two guards later anyway, and asked if Ghislaine had been hiding his true skills all this time. Ghislaine retorted by asking what importance that held for him. He pulled his sword from Philip's corpse and faced the three of them. From the level of mana they emitted, Ghislaine knew the person in the middle was much stronger than the two beside him. Ghislaine instantly activated the mana in his body, and mysterious threads wrapped around his left hand. He knew he had to end this fight as quickly as possible and asked who had ordered them to carry out this evil mission. Frank immediately replied, asking why a dead man needed to know more. Annoyed, Ghislaine stated that he knew Frank wouldn't tell him easily, but it didn't matter, as he would be spilling it all soon enough. He glared with sharp intimidation, his sword already coursing with dense mana. Frank's subordinates also drew their swords and asked if they should just behead the eldest son. Frank refused, ordering them to capture Ghislaine alive and destroy all his limbs so that he would go mad with pain. With a cunning smile, Frank added that Ghislaine must writhe in agony to create a beautiful result. Hearing this, Frank's two men charged at Ghislaine with all their might, but Ghislaine suddenly threw a firecracker at them, startling one of them. In that moment of surprise, Ghislaine unhesitatingly thrust his sword, splitting the firecracker and viciously piercing the subordinate's head, killing him instantly. The other subordinate, angry at Ghislaine for using cheap tricks, dashed to the side and swung his sword at Ghislaine's back. But to his surprise, Ghislaine fluidly switched from a thrusting stance to a backward parry, perfectly blocking the attack. Not stopping there, Ghislaine wrapped his right arm around his opponent's sword, used his right hand to strike the man's grip, and easily disarmed him. Ghislaine then twisted his waist to the right, moving the sword away from his opponent while adding momentum to his left hand for a fatal counter-slash that beheaded the man in the blink of an eye. It all happened in a seamless motion in a fraction of a second. Suddenly, Ghislaine was startled by Frank launching a surprise sword attack from behind, but he deftly controlled the sword wrapped around his right arm with his right hand while crouching, perfectly blocking the surprise attack. Frank was shocked that his sneak attack had failed, unable to believe Ghislaine could block it from such an awkward and difficult position. It had been a perfect sneak attack. Then, without warning, Ghislaine rose from his crouch and mercilessly swung with his left hand, shocking Frank to his core. The smoking pipe fell from Frank's mouth, split by Ghislaine's slash, which had been aimed directly at his neck. But as the pipe hit the ground, Ghislaine was suddenly taken aback, as Frank's sword was still hurtling fiercely toward his head, forcing him to block it with both swords. After the clang of swords subsided, Frank, whose neck was coated in mana, remarked that he was very surprised. If he had been low on mana, his head would have been severed. Hearing this, Ghislaine, whose hands were trembling from the pressure of Frank's sword, thought to himself about how Frank survived a slash to the neck, wondering if he had focused mana around his neck to reduce the damage. Annoyed by the young boy's actions, Frank strengthened the mana in his sword grip and declared that he didn't know how Ghislaine learned such a strange sword technique at his young age, but he would die here. He unleashed an even denser, intimidating aura of mana. Mercilessly, with his superior amount of mana, Frank pressed his sword down harder, certain he would win right then and there. But Ghislaine just smiled widely under such heavy pressure, which threw Frank's confidence into a chasm of shock. Ghislaine allowed his two swords to be pressed down until they stuck into the ground. then used the rebound momentum from the embedded swords as a solid base to launch a spinning left kick that slammed into Frank's right cheek so hard it sent him flying backward. Frank caught his hat, put it back on, and said that he had told him it wouldn't work with his small amount of mana, but then he suddenly vomited a large amount of blood and fell to one knee. Racked with pain and trembling, Frank wondered what had happened, questioning how the attack power could be so different and how it was possible for Ghislain to break through his defense with his current skill level. Ghislain slowly approached the kneeling Frank and declared that he never expected the real culprit behind Elena's death to be him, telling him to prepare for his demise. Ghislain's body emanated a much denser aura, as he had activated 3 mana cores at once. This was a secret technique that Frank knew nothing about. Frank was utterly shocked, breaking into a cold sweat at the sight of Ghislain's mana increasing to such a terrifying level. Before Frank's shock could fade, Ghislain charged forward with all his might, swinging both swords simultaneously, a movement so fast that Frank was stunned. Frank struggled to block Ghislain's relentless 2-sword assault, being pushed back with every powerful blow he parried. Finally, after a last slash that sent a shriek of clashing steel into the air, Frank's hand trembled violently in pain. He thought that it was impossible that his hand had gone numb just from blocking the attacks. He mused that no matter how much mana someone had, there must be a limit, and he had never heard of a method to increase mana to this extent. Frank's sword began to crack. Seeing Ghislain's sharp gaze full of dense, intimidating aura as he prepared for his next slash, Frank finally admitted that his opponent had transformed into a different person. Without mercy, Ghislain launched a one-handed slash with his left hand, shattering Frank's defending sword into pieces and wounding him diagonally across the chest, causing blood to gush from his body. But it wasn't over. Ghislain followed up by stabbing his sword into Frank's stomach with full force. This made Frank scream hysterically in pain between bouts of vomiting blood. Ghislain then pushed Frank's neck hard with his hand, slamming him against a building wall with incredible force, causing unimaginable pain. As he pressed his sword upwards, making Frank's body tremble uncontrollably, Ghislain told him it was time to continue their earlier conversation and demanded to know who ordered him to do this. Frank, not yet ready to give up, pulled a dagger from his left sleeve, preparing to throw it at Elena to ensure his mission succeeded even if he died. Suddenly, his dagger and left arm froze, held by the mysterious threads from Ghislain's left hand. Ghislain continued, suggesting they make a deal. If Frank answered his question and didn't try anything funny, he would sheath his sword. In extreme pain, Frank was shocked to find his left hand immobile. He wondered if the threads were made of the eldest son's mana, and, if so, when Ghislain had created them. Of course, Ghislain had already prepared the mana threads on his left hand before fighting Frank's subordinates. Since Frank remained silent, Ghislain pressed his sword harder, adding that he was sure a man of Frank's caliber knew how to heal himself, but it wouldn't be a problem if he destroyed his mana core. Just as Frank was startled by this threat, Ghislain's mana-infused sword thrust shattered Frank's mana core, causing his mana to begin dispersing. Feeling pain on the brink of death, Frank screamed, asking if Ghislain was insane, warning that one mistake could cause a mana backlash explosion that would destroy the entire area, and asking if he planned to die too. Ghislain laughed, retorting that such things only apply to amateurs and that he could handle it. His confident look made Frank panic, sweat drenching his entire body. Realizing his own mana was about to explode, leading to a fatal death, Frank finally screamed the information. It was Count Desmond who made the request, saying he needed something to trigger a war between the Perdium and Degard families. The dark shadow orchestrating the war was finally revealed, paving the way for true revenge. Ghislain finally understood the motive behind the chaos. He recalled that in the past, underworld jobs like this were handed to families allied with noble houses. Ghislain was furious to learn that Duke Delphine had stooped to using the dirty hands of a lesser noble to carry out this evil plan. Ghislain then demanded to know if that was the reason Frank had to kill Elena. Just as Frank confirmed it, Ghislain plunged his sword deeper, all the way through Frank's back, causing even more blood to spurt from his body. In a state of near death, Frank panicked even more, asking what Ghislain was doing, as this was different from what he had promised. Ghislain replied with a cunning smile, asking what was wrong. Frank had surely killed many people before, but now he was scared when it was his turn. Suddenly, Frank began to chuckle, which slightly surprised Ghislain. Frank pressed his head against Ghislain's forehead and said that nothing would change even if Ghislain killed him. He claimed to have already completed his work with Dagard and questioned if anyone would listen to a boy like him, predicting that Perdium would be annihilated by war. Unable to listen to the scoundrel's rambling any longer, Ghislain pushed Frank's face back and told him something, that he had been reborn, so this time would be different. He said this with a confident smile, followed by exploding Frank's mana core into the sky, sending him screaming hysterically into a hell of cruel retribution. The mana explosion in the sky, like a firework, was the only thing that saw him off with a gentle warmth before he burned in the hottest fires of the deepest hell. After ensuring all enemies were dead and Elena was still alive, the sword dropped from Ghislain's grasp. He felt extremely exhausted and suddenly vomited a large amount of blood from the strain of exploding 3 mana cores at once. He was annoyed that this much effort already made him suffer so greatly, when in his past, as the mercenary king, exploding 3 mana cores was an easy feat for him. Feeling his job wasn't done, Ghislain rushed to break down the door of a house where he knew there was another victim. And just as he expected, inside lay the corpse of a Dagard noble's child, along with the body of their night guard. With this, Ghislain understood how the conflict had been instigated, leading to mutual accusations between Dagard and Perdium that would trigger a massive war. Knowing that if this evidence became public, war would be certain in the present timeline, Ghislain, without hesitation, used his last firecracker to burn all the evidence until nothing remained. Afterwards, he carried Elena on his back to return to Perdium, thinking to himself that he would not let things go according to their plan. However, unbeknownst to Ghislain, his movements had been watched by another mysterious figure from a treetop. The figure immediately vanished to report to their superiors. A moment later, the figure arrived and knelt in the middle of a round table surrounded by several superiors. They berated the figure for failing to eliminate one girl, despite having sent their best knight, Frank. The cloaked figure excused the failure by blaming it all on Ghislain Perdium. Contrary to what they knew, that Ghislain was useless, the cloaked figure saw with their own eyes how the rumors were completely different from reality. Recalling the terrifying sight of Ghislain's sword technique, the figure said with a fearful tone that it was like seeing a completely different person. They added that they had completed the mission related to the guard, so there would be no problem starting the territorial war, and begged for one more chance. Most of the round table members disliked the cloaked figure, who was prone to making excuses and had caused a huge loss. They wanted the figure executed immediately, but the supreme leader suddenly shouted for them to be quiet and asked what kind of chance the figure wanted. The figure panically replied that they would definitely get rid of Ghislain Perdium by creating a duel that would occur naturally. They had someone in mind, Cain Loges, who was famous for his strength-based swordsmanship and, despite his youth, was already known as the symbol of strength for his age. The figure assured them that no one else in the north could match his power, and since Cain was Ghislain's cousin, it wouldn't be difficult to arrange a meeting between them. This made the leadership council fall into contemplation. Finally, the supreme leader made a decision, stating that if the figure failed, there would be no more chances. And so, the cloaked figure immediately set out on their last chance. The final opportunity to erase Ghislain Perdium now hinged on a duel that would shake the north. The scene shifts back to the Perdium Castle training ground in the morning. Fergus, having just arrived, was startled to see Ghislain able to throw his sword into a wall and pull it back to his hand. Fergus wondered how his young master could do such a thing. Ghislain explained that he used mana threads like a rope to control the sword from a distance. In his previous life, he used this mana thread technique frequently, but he was now disappointed that he had to explode a mana core before he could use it due to a lack of basic mana. Fortunately, he could still safely create a single mana thread even with his current limited mana. Fergus was genuinely impressed by the technique. Even though he had been training with mana for a long time, he had never seen anything like it. What impressed him even more was that Ghislain could use such a high-level mana technique when he hadn't seen him use or train with mana at all in the past few days. Ghislain then asked why Fergus was there. The old man bowed and said he came to thank Ghislain for protecting the young lady. Instead of just thanks, Ghislain invited the old man to join them for a meal. Several days had passed since then, and the festival was temporarily halted. This was understandable, as the princess's own personal guards had tried to sell her out. But what disappointed Elena, as she waited for food with Ghislain, Belinda, and Fergus, was that no one believed her when she said it was her brother, Ghislain, who had saved her. For Ghislain, convincing people didn't matter. What was important was that Elena was safe and he had prevented a war. However, he suspected that Duke Delphine's side had not given up on destroying Perdium. He thought to himself that he couldn't keep stopping them alone and that he needed to build up his military strength. A servant arrived with their food. As the meal was about to be served, Ghislain felt reluctant about getting more involved in politics to strengthen his military. A problem immediately arose right before his eyes. When the dishes were uncovered, Ghislain was surprised and asked Belinda why they were having dessert so early. Just as Belinda was about to explain their current financial situation, loud shouts about compensation came from outside, startling Ghislain. It turned out to be merchants protesting loudly at the Perdium gate. Belinda explained that their county was full of merchants who profited from the festival and that last year had gone very well. But since the festival was stopped after only one day, it was natural for the merchants to be angry, in her opinion. Hearing this, Ghislain was quite shocked. He knew the merchants would become more aggressive if he didn't do something. He asked Fergus to send soldiers to calm the merchants down. But Fergus replied that they didn't have any, as most of them had been sent to the front of the monster forest as a defense against orc attacks. This news shocked and frustrated Ghislain. Perdium County was practically a perpetual war zone due to barbarian races from the north and a monster forest from which monsters could emerge at any time. No money and no soldiers made Ghislain's head spin. He pulled Belinda aside to a corner of the room to ask about their finances. Belinda, half-jokingly, said she was out of money and that the Count had already cut Ghislain's funds because he always spent money like water. With no money and no soldiers, Perdium stood on the brink of a ruin deeper than war. A short while later, Ghislain was back in his room, sitting dejectedly by the window and staring out at the Perdium territory, wondering what they had left with no money and no soldiers. He realized that without money, there was nothing he could do, even with his knowledge of the future. He had to get money somehow. Suddenly, hurried footsteps approached his room. It was Ricardo, who reported that there was a problem. Young Master Kane wanted to see him. This made Ghislain frown. It turned out Kane had beaten Scoven badly. Scoven's armor was nearly pierced by Kane's powerful fist, and he was lying unconscious with a severely bruised face when Ghislain arrived. Seeing Kane call out to him with an arrogant tone and no hint of guilt, Ghislain remembered that arrogant face belonged to the heir of Loges County, an ally of Perdium. Kane Loges was Ghislain's only friend in the past, as well as an enemy he hated. As Kane approached Ghislain, with the cloaked villain Ghislain didn't yet recognize behind him, the Perdium heir asked Ricardo what had happened. Ricardo explained that they had initially responded to a report of a disturbance at a bar, where they found Kane with his night guards. Since they knew each other, Kane asked them if the recent rumors about young Master Ghislain were true. Commander Scoven then explained the details of the rumor to Kane. Kane, not believing the rumor that Ghislain had become strong, immediately beat Scoven to a pulp. Hearing Ricardo's story, Kane tried to defend his actions, telling Ricardo that if he was going to tell Ghislain, he should at least be honest. He claimed that the fool, Scoven, had said that Ghislain, who had never even trained, had defeated an orc with his bare hands and handled the traitorous night guards by himself. Kane said that was why he hit him a little to bring him to his senses, adding that none of this would have happened if Ghislaine hadn't lied in the first place. He looked down on Ghislaine, who remained silent, trying to contain his frustration. In the past, Kane had always been arrogant and treated Ghislaine like a subordinate. Every time he came to Perdium, Kane caused chaos. Ghislaine thought to himself that even after all that chaos, no one dared say anything because he was treated like Kane's subordinate. No one underestimated Kane. Unlike Ghislaine, who always had an inferiority complex, Kane's confidence and bravery were praised as qualities befitting an heir, which was why Ghislaine was criticized more. Ghislaine smiled, reminiscing about his past. Seeing that Ghislaine seemed to be restraining himself, Kane smiled, surprised that his provocation had failed to anger him. Just a short while ago in Loges County, the cloaked figure had come to Kane and asked him to eliminate Ghislaine. The figure said that if Kane succeeded, the supreme leader would support the Loges family. Kane thought it would be easy to get rid of Ghislaine, but since Ghislaine was an heir, he wondered how he should go about it. The cloaked figure suggested that Kane could provoke Ghislaine into a duel, making it look like an accident. It would appear as a trivial conflict between heirs, and the cloaked figure offered to accompany Kane, disguised as a night guard, to orchestrate the situation so the duel would happen. Back in the present, seeing Ghislaine's unusually changed attitude firsthand, Kane wondered if the cloaked figure wanted him to eliminate Ghislaine because he had changed so completely. To stick to the original plan, Kane deliberately asked Ghislaine to prepare the usual things for their entertainment, since the festival was currently interrupted. After a moment of thought, Ghislaine understood that Kane meant alcohol and women. In the past, he always fulfilled these requests because he didn't want to get beaten up again, but now he had no intention of doing so, as it would just waste his precious money. Then, a clever idea came to Ghislaine's mind. He thought to himself that his source of money had been here all along. He stared at Kane for a long moment. Seeing Ghislaine remain silent, Kane urged him to bring his request quickly. But Ghislaine replied that he would, but first asked if Kane didn't have a debt to pay him. His sharp gaze made the cloaked figure behind Kane raise an eyebrow. Kane, also puzzled, asked what debt he was talking about. Ghislaine smiled, held out his hand, and demanded 1,000 gold as payment for the money he had fronted for Kane's requests, including interest. Kane was annoyed, saying that preparing those things shouldn't cost more than 100 gold, and besides, Ghislaine should be the one paying as a fee for their friendship, since Kane was his only friend. But Ghislaine retorted, calling their friendship nonsense and saying he had always been a doormat for Kane to step on. He demanded payment before he beat him up, stating that he needed a lot of money right now. His loud declaration made Ricardo panic with fear, and the other bar patrons wondered who would dare challenge Kane, the strongest figure in the north. His pride trampled in front of so many people. Kane stood up straight and said sternly that Ghislaine had gotten bold just because he let him be. He accused Ghislaine of thinking he was strong just because he spread false rumors about defeating a knight. He called him a parasite who was a detriment to the land, which was why everyone in the north called him a foolish bastard, since he, an heir, did nothing but spout nonsense. As Kane told Ghislaine to wake up, he clenched his left fist and suddenly threw a hard punch at Ghislaine's head. But with just a slight turn of his waist to the right, and with his hands still in his pockets, Ghislaine easily dodged the punch, which greatly surprised Kane, Ricardo, and the cloaked figure, their eyes widening. Annoyed that his attack failed, Kane unhesitatingly launched a powerful backhand with his left hand, but Ghislaine again avoided it by ducking. Suddenly, without warning, Ghislaine delivered a devastating liver blow that shocked and pained Kane so much his eye veins bulged. Not stopping there, Ghislaine tried to punch Kane in the face, but Kane managed to block it with his right hand. Suddenly, Kane knelt on the floor and started vomiting from the liver blow he had just received. Seeing this, the cloaked figure rushed to check on Kane's condition, but Ghislaine told him to stop whining, as he knew Kane had parried his attack. Annoyed, the cloaked figure shouted at Ghislaine to back off and asked what he thought he was doing. The incident caused an uproar among the bar patrons, who couldn't believe Ghislaine had just knocked Kane to his knees. Ghislaine was honestly puzzled by Kane's overreaction and how the bar patrons seemed to be exaggerating the situation. He finally understood that this was all a prepared setup. As suspected, Kane was actually whispering to the cloaked figure, asking how his acting was, and the figure praised it as great. The cloaked figure was pleased that Kane had set the stage perfectly, making people believe Ghislaine was at fault. The figure smiled, saying that this should be enough to justify a duel. Hearing this, Kane prepared to pull something from his cloak, thinking to himself that this was a rare opportunity to gain powerful support and that he had to leave a deep impression this time. It was the perfect time to cut down Purdium, a crumbling power. After pulling out a gauntlet, Kane prepared to throw it and declared that Ghislaine had dared to tarnish a nobleman's honor with lies and then attacked him for trying to verify the truth. Before Kane could finish challenging him to a duel, Ghislaine's own gauntlet had already struck him in the face, and Ghislaine declared that he was challenging Kane Loges to a duel. The move shocked and infuriated Kane. Ghislaine continued, stating that Kane had insulted him, the heir, in front of the people of Purdium, and had also attacked his knight, thus tarnishing a nobleman's honor. He asked if Kane planned to refuse the duel. This left Kane, the cloaked figure, and Ricardo speechless. Of course, Kane was not afraid of the duel challenge. He wiped the dirt from around his mouth and said with a laugh that he knew Ghislaine was a fool, but he didn't know he was foolish enough to dig his own grave. He accepted the challenge, warning Ghislaine not to regret it even if he died. As Kane pointed his sword at Ghislaine's neck, Ghislaine smiled faintly and told Ricardo to bring all the protesting merchants from the castle gates, promising to make sure they receive the maximum possible profit. Thanks to Ghislaine's clever idea, the tourists who were previously disappointed that the festival was suddenly canceled now had a replacement event that was even more exciting than the previous festival. With the crowd of spectators that showed up, the merchants who were previously angry could now sell their goods again, and some even became bookies to facilitate betting on the duel. Seeing many spectators betting on him, Kane, who was already in the duel arena, was angry to see Ghislaine dare to tarnish a sacred duel into a marketplace. Kane stated firmly that he would make it clear before they started that his sword would not stop even if Ghislaine surrendered. Ghislaine mentally agreed with Kane's words, knowing that Kane had wanted to finish him off from the very beginning. But just as Ghislaine was about to start the duel, the robed man suddenly stopped him, saying that the betting could not proceed as things stood. The problem was that no one was betting on Ghislaine because all the spectators believed that Kane would undoubtedly win. When the bookie proposed changing the betting terms to how long Ghislaine could last against Kane so that someone would bet on him, Scovin, supported by Ricardo, and Elena, accompanied by Belinda, suddenly placed their bets on Ghislaine under the original betting terms. As a result, the betting conditions for both sides were met, which greatly shocked the spectators, while the robed man moved away from the bookie with a disappointed look on his face. With that, the duel could officially begin. While drawing his sword, Ghislaine remarked that he was older than Kane, so it would be a bit strange if he started first, telling him to come forward. Ghislaine said this with a look full of confidence. Hearing this, Kane, who was already holding his sword, took a low stance and replied that it was too late for him to act like the elder, telling him to get ready. Kane instantly leaped high from his stance and launched a full power sword swing downwards with terrifying force. Fortunately, Ghislaine was still able to parry the heavy swing with his own sword, but Kane suddenly used a half-swording technique, gripping his own blade and swinging the hilt upwards to knock Ghislaine's sword defense back. Not stopping there, Kane instantly launched a diagonal downward thrust with the hilt in a relentless series of attacks. But Ghislaine agilely dodged the thrust by ducking down. Impressively, Kane then launched a hard left kick from the fulcrum of his sword hilt, which Ghislaine fortunately still managed to dodge with a sidestep. As a result, the kick shattered the duel arena floor into pieces. Seeing this, the spectators cheered because Ghislaine wouldn't block any of Kane's heavy series of attacks. The cheers made Kane smile widely, having the upper hand, and this annoyed Ghislaine quite a bit. Elena also became annoyed seeing her brother seemingly cornered, while Belinda and Ricardo panicked in a cold sweat. Belinda even started to ask if the duel should be stopped now. Of course, the one-sided exchange of mechanics made the robed man smile widely. He said to himself that it was too late to stop the duel now. No matter who the opponent was, the moment they decided to fight Cain, they were already trapped. An opponent helpless against his great power would start to think they couldn't fight him and would eventually just try to avoid him. In the end, when the opponent got tired from constantly dodging, an opening would be created and death would claim them. The robed man thought that Cain always won that way. At that moment, Ghislain continued to dodge Cain's barrage of full-power sword slashes with lightning-fast steps and body movements. Seeing this, Cain acknowledged that Ghislain was very slippery. He commented that it seemed Ghislain's skills had indeed improved and that it made sense. Cain then spun his sword and held the blade with both hands in a full blade grip. While swinging the inverted sword with all his might, Cain shouted loudly that Ghislain had always been good at running away. The sword swing shot forward with insane power, forcing Ghislain to block it with a two-handed grip on his sword. But suddenly, Cain pulled his sword, causing its guard to get caught on Ghislain's body. Then, with a full-power pull and swing, Ghislain was thrown high into the air, which stunned the audience, made Ricardo panic to death, and made the robed man overjoyed. The robed man was sure that Ghislain would die now if he fell from such a height. However, who would have thought? Ghislain activated mana in his feet and said that he wanted to be gentle, but Cain had crossed the line. Ghislain then managed to land safely on the arena floor and dashed towards Cain with lightning speed, causing Cain's eyes to widen. Without hesitation, Ghislain launched a low slash at Cain's stomach, which Cain couldn't parry at all. But fortunately, Cain was saved because for some reason Ghislain seemed to only make a shallow attack. Nevertheless, Cain was incredibly shocked by Ghislain's speed, which was beyond his reaction time. The robed man was just as shocked because he didn't expect Ghislain to be able to stabilize his fall by condensing mana in his feet. With his back to Cain, Ghislain called his swordsmanship foolish. He asked if Cain thought he was the strongest just because his opponents always got scared when he showed a little of his power, and then stated he would open Cain's eyes now. Ghislain then turned back to face Cain with a look full of confidence. Seeing this, a vein popped on Cain's face. He lunged forward while trying to raise his sword high, asking how Ghislain planned to do that. Before Cain could even swing his sword, Ghislain suddenly launched a high spinning kick with his left foot, which hit the hilt of Cain's sword to disrupt his attack. Afterward, Ghislain jumped over Cain's disrupted sword swing with a spinning leap to the left while delivering a sword strike to Cain's shoulder to reduce his arm strength. Annoyed at being played with like this, Cain launched a sword thrust with all his might towards Ghislain, who had just landed. But Ghislain easily dodged the thrust by jumping to the left, then stomped on Cain's sword to pin it to the floor, followed by a sword slash to Cain's neck that sent blood spurting out. Cain froze, receiving such a wound for the first time, while the audience was stunned to see the strongest man in the northern region get injured by Ghislain, who had always been considered trash. They shouted, asking what had just happened, and if Lord Ghislain had improved so much, wondering if he was going to win the duel. The spectators said this, annoyed at the feeling they were about to lose their bets. The situation turned around quickly. Now it was the robed man's turn to panic while Elena and Scoven were happy to see Ghislain starting to gain the upper hand. Cain himself was puzzled because the wounds he had received were only shallow, even though Ghislain could have cut him deeper. In a cold sweat, Cain thought to himself, wondering if Ghislain was doing it on purpose and how that bastard dared to show off such swordsmanship. Cain was both puzzled and furious with Ghislain. Seeing this, Ghislain suddenly threw his sword to the side, which quite surprised Cain. Then Ghislain stated that the vast difference in their skill levels wouldn't be entertaining for anyone and declared that he would fight with his bare hands. Cain, unable to contain his anger any longer, asked what he just said. Ghislain continued, saying that he should use this moment to teach Cain a lesson with his bare hands. Ghislain said this, now having rolled up his sleeves. Honestly, Cain was puzzled as to what Ghislain meant by teaching him. While rolling up another sleeve, Ghislain answered that it seemed Cain was not worthy of fighting him in swordsmanship, so he would take a handicap. He proposed they fight barehanded, asking if Kane was good at that. In exchange, Ghislaine would bet another 2,000 gold, double the initial amount, that he would be the one to win. Ghislaine's words sent the entire audience into deep shock, including the robe man who was sweating coldly beside the arena. The robe man thought to himself that Ghislaine dared to challenge Kane to a barehanded duel. He never thought the day would come when he would be so happy about Ghislaine's foolishness, believing that Lady Luck was still with them. With the duel's conditions changed, the bookie asked the spectators to increase their betting amounts. Some cheered that Kane would still win and supported him, but this time, quite a few people cheered for Ghislaine and placed bets on him. Hearing the roar of the crowd, whose support was now divided, Kane took off his cloak and said firmly, with a laugh, that he shouldn't make him laugh about fighting barehanded. He told Ghislaine to come on and fight him without a weapon. Kane said this while throwing his cloak high into the air and, without hesitation, charged with all his might towards Ghislaine, still using his sword. With a single full power sword thrust, Kane shouted for him to die. But, again, with an agile movement, ducking down, Ghislaine easily avoided the thrust. And he said that he expected as much, and it seemed he had a way Kane up. Instantly, Ghislaine sidestepped with great speed, then mercilessly delivered a powerful right fist to Kane's knee, followed by a devastating left uppercut that hit Kane's chin so hard his body was lifted and thick blood spurted from his mouth. Kane spontaneously staggered and fell to one knee on the arena floor. Feeling immense pain, Kane thought to himself, asking what was happening and how this punk could move like that. The spectators cheered even louder, seeing that Ghislaine was about to win this time. But Ghislaine wasn't satisfied yet. With an intimidating gaze, he told Kane to stand up, saying he hadn't even started. How irritated Kane was to hear that. He charged again and unleashed a blind, savage sword attack. But it was all in vain as Ghislaine was able to dodge everything easily. Without hesitation, Ghislaine grabbed Kane's sword arm, and Ghislaine said to himself that Kane had never even looked at him properly before and that he should bow to him whenever he appeared. Ghislaine then powerfully twisted Kane's arm, followed by a very hard knee kick right to his left ribs. This time, the damage Kane felt was truly painful, causing him to vomit blood again and his eyes to roll wildly. Who would have thought Ghislaine would be so merciless this time? With the intention of finishing Kane to secure the future of the Loges family, Ghislaine launched a relentless barrage of punches, again and again and again, without stopping. Countless punches had already hit Kane's entire body until his appearance was severely battered, almost unrecognizable, in front of all the spectators in the Podium arena. As Kane slumped weakly with blood seeping all over his body, Ghislaine grabbed his hair and said he felt sorry for Kane's father. He mentioned that Count Loges helped Podium until the end of his life, just because he was his father's friend, but his son's mindset was very different. Ghislaine's words startled Kane. Kane then remembered an incident from a few years ago in Loges County. At that time, Kane had strongly protested his father for continuously sending aid to the poor in barren Podium, even though their own county was also facing difficulties. Kane had told his father not to go to Podium, that it hadn't even been a week since he returned from there. He mentioned that everyone was trying to stop him, but asked why his father always insisted on helping Podium. Kane had asked in a harsh tone. Count Loges was silent for a moment and answered simply that it was because they were friends and there was no other reason. His father's words at that time now echoed clearly through Ghislaine's recent statement. Just as Ghislaine was about to deliver the finishing blow, Kane quickly closed his eyes, preparing to accept punishment for his sins regarding his different attitude towards Podium compared to the one shown by his late father. But the finishing blow never came. Instead, Kane heard Ghislaine say that this should be enough to teach him a lesson. Ghislaine's words made Kane shocked, and he opened his eyes again. Kane was even more shocked because Ghislaine extended a hand and told him to stand up. Hearing such forgiveness from an opponent he had never regarded, Kane's entire ego crumbled as his face fell, looking down at the floor again. Weak tone, Kane said that he admitted his defeat, but that was enough to make everyone in the arena unable to contain their surprise, especially the robed man who had once again failed to keep his promise to his supreme leader. While the spectators who supported and bet on Ghislain, including Elena and her companions, were cheering for their champion's victory, the robed man was shouting Kane's name and angrily climbing into the arena. The robed man yelled loudly in Kane's ear, asking why he admitted defeat so quickly just because he was at a slight disadvantage and what he was doing when he had believed in him. Kane ignored the question and told the robed man to go away because he was done with this game. Seeing the robed man's extreme frustration, Ghislain deliberately embarrassed him in front of the audience by announcing that the robed man would treat the entire audience to a feast of food and drink. When the robed man vehemently protested the announcement, Ghislain grabbed his right shoulder and said firmly that this was the price to be paid for losing the duel. He told him he should have enough money and not to expect this to be a deduction from the betting money. He reminded him to add 2,000 gold to the initial bet of only 1,000 gold and warned that if he ran away, he knew what would happen. Ghislain said this with thick intimidation while gripping the robed man's shoulder hard, causing him great pain. After the robed man agreed to all the demands, Ghislain released his grip and immediately left the arena. The next day, Ghislain, in his room, was amazed to see the amount of money he received from yesterday's winning bet. He could have actually paid for a small mercenary army with that much money, but because he needed a larger force, Ghislain intended to save it until he had the required amount. But suddenly, Elena and Belinda were already in his room. They teased Ghislain, asking where he planned to spend that money. Confidently, Belinda said that it was obvious what the young master would do. She mentioned that Miss Amelia's birthday was coming soon and that the master did such an extraordinary thing to buy her an expensive gift. Wasn't that right? She stated that his intentions were very clear. Elena added, asking if her brother did all this just to look good in front of his fiancée. Hearing that, Ghislain was in stunned silence and asked with a puzzled face if he had a fiancée. Belinda and Elena were perplexed by Ghislain's coy act, as they were talking about Amelia from Rayfold County. Only then did Ghislain remember that the Spider-Woman named Amelia Rayfold was a noble among nobles, known for her kind nature and actions towards everyone, regardless of their status. Thus, she had the full support of the people in her territory. But he remembered she would later incite a rebellion and become known as the Witch of the North. In the end, she would join Duke Delphine and drive the final nail into Perdium's coffin, a true traitor, in Ghislain's opinion. After hearing from Belinda that Count Perdium would be home in a week, Ghislain announced his departure for Rayfold County before his father's return, not to celebrate a birthday, but to get money from them. Now he switched to Amelia. Uniquely, a spider always hung from Amelia's mouth, which is why Ghislain remembered her that way. Just as Ghislain remembered, Amelia was indeed very kind to her people. She was willing to give her luxurious shoes to a poor child who had no footwear. She said that she preferred to walk barefoot herself rather than her people. She even asked a soldier to build shelters and provide food for every poor person she met on the street. As a result, the people of Rayfold truly respected Amelia. However, who would have thought? Amelia's main motive was revealed when she spoke with her knight escort, named Bernaf, in Amelia's garden. While Bernaf was washing Amelia's feet and praising her hard work, Amelia said that her father always demanded absolute obedience from the citizens in the Rayfold region. Whereas, according to Amelia, common people will always follow the one who makes them feel comfortable and safe. Bernaf stated that Amelia had now won the hearts of the people, so he was sure Amelia would be greatly advantaged in the future succession competition. Instead of being happy with her guard's praise, Amelia placed her soul on Bernaf's face and asked what happened in the duel against the best sword from the north. Hearing that, Bernaf immediately apologized. He didn't want to keep winning, which could make people start paying attention to Amelia. According to him, it was not yet time for Amelia to show her fangs of power. Besides that, he promised to continue being a loyal sword for Amelia, a promise proven by the honor of kissing her soul. Hearing that, Amelia was slightly relieved. No matter what, she had invested a lot in raising Bernaf, and because of that, Amelia stressed that Bernaf must not show even the slightest weakness. Afterwards, Amelia asked about the merchants. Bernaf explained that Amelia did not need to worry about their merchant guild, Arctium. The Arctium Guild had already bought all the materials needed for the reconstruction of the monster forest outpost, which was recently half destroyed by an orc attack in Perdium. So when Perdium needed materials, they had to buy everything from the Arctium Guild. This meant that all the money supported by Count Rayfold to Perdium each year returned in full to Rayfold County via their affiliated merchant guild. In addition, Bernaf had also recruited all the soldiers and knights who had left Perdium. Since they were quite well trained in fighting against barbarian tribes, their quality was perfect for a military force. Amelia was pleased to hear the political and military reports from Bernaf, but she reminded him to maintain their guild's appearance as an ordinary merchant guild. No matter what, their identity must not be revealed before they gather enough power. A futile warning from Amelia, because in reality, their political intrigue would be exposed shortly in a way she never expected. Suddenly, the head butler approached Amelia in the garden. He was forced to deliver a message from a gate that young Master Ghislain Perdium had come to visit Rayfold Palace. Amelia asked with surprise what that scoundrel was doing here. Sweating coldly, the butler replied that he said he had something to discuss regarding the Merchant Guild. The butler's words made Amelia and Bernaf unable to hide their surprise. A moment later, Amelia greeted Ghislain with a cold stare in the reception room, with a cat on her lap. She didn't like Ghislain suddenly showing up without notice. It was the same as having no manners. But Ghislain just smiled and said her birthday was coming soon, so he thought he would give her an early birthday present. He mentioned he took this flower from a merchant guild out front and that its aroma was quite nice. He added that he planned to buy flowers from this guild from now on, then asked what its name was again, the Arctia Merchant Guild. Ghislain deliberately taunted Amelia with his words until she was silent for a long time. Not wanting her guild's cover to be blown any further, Amelia deliberately feigned ignorance about what Ghislain was saying. Since she had received the gift, Amelia said she would excuse herself from the living room. But before Amelia got far, Ghislain suddenly told Amelia Rayfold to sit down. He said this while emitting an aura of thick intimidation from his eyes that severely shocked and pressured Amelia. Even the coffee cup and the living room table trembled from Ghislain's intimidating pressure. Seeing this, Amelia broke into a cold sweat and thought to herself how the boy who used to squirm and struggle to speak whenever she was in front of him could emit such terrifying pressure. Since Amelia had not yet left the room, Ghislain, who now picked up a cup of coffee, spoke again, saying he would be direct. He stated that he was in great need of money right now, so he told her to give him 10,000 gold. Amelia asked in astonishment what he was saying, questioning if he was really visiting so suddenly to ask his fiancée for a large sum of money, and whether this was Count Perdium's wish. Ghislain replied that his father had nothing to do with this, and just to give him the money. He then asked if she wasn't planning on marrying him anyway. Ghislain said this while spilling coffee from the cup, which startled Amelia. Ghislain continued, mentioning, for example, her knight escort. He suggested that if she were to become the lord of this region, it would be more likely for the knight to become her husband. But before that, he wondered what would happen if news spread in Rayfold, where the succession competition was fierce, that she was secretly building up power. Before Ghislain finished speaking, the cat on Amelia's lap suddenly growled loudly, as if sharing its owner's anger. But Amelia still tried to be polite, saying that young Master Ghislain shouldn't talk like that, even if it was a joke. Ghislain replied not to worry, that he would keep the secret for a while. Of course, he added, he might not be able to keep it if he returned empty-handed. Ghislain said this, still pressing his demand for money. Unable to take Ghislain's threats and taunts any longer, Amelia finally called Bernaf into the reception room. After Bernaf greeted him, Ghislain knew that Bernaf was the man who was always by Amelia's side, a talented individual who had more potential than the current best sword in the north. Knowing Bernaf's presence was tantamount to an assassination threat, Ghislain said that if he died in Rayfold, a war might break out. He asked if Amelia was sure she could handle it. Amelia answered coldly that of course she could. A criminal would suddenly break in, cause chaos, and be killed by a knight escort. That would be the rumor that would spread regarding his death. She then ordered Bernaf to finish him now. Bernaf immediately affirmed her order by drawing his sword. Seeing that, Ghislain smiled tensely. He grasped his sword and thought to himself that if that was how she wanted to play, he had no choice but to get a little more serious. The room's atmosphere became tense as Ghislain and Bernaf both unleashed their dense mana auras. But suddenly Bernaf smiled faintly, which startled Ghislain, who would have thought that an assassin was hiding inside the knight armor statue, who then lunged with all his might to stab the sofa where Ghislain was sitting from behind. But Ghislain had nimbly rolled onto the floor beforehand to avoid the sudden stab and then launched a hard, mana-coated kick right into the solar plexus of the still lunging assassin, sending him flying far out of the room through the shattered window pane. Seeing that, Bernaf and Amelia were shocked that their surprise attack had completely failed. Ghislain commented on the assassin, saying they feigned politeness but launched an ambush, calling them very hospitable. Ghislain then advanced towards Bernaf while launching an upper slash that the guard was able to block. As they pressed against each other with their mana-coated swords, Ghislain asked again if Rayfold didn't know the Knight's code of ethics. Bernaf replied firmly that Ghislain was the one who first acted impolitely by coming suddenly without notice and disturbing his lady, so there was no need for courtesy from the beginning. Bernaf then caught Ghislain's sword with his left arm, followed by a mana-coated sword thrust that Ghislain managed to dodge by rolling to the right. With the momentum of the roll, Ghislain launched a spinning counterkick that sent the guard flying backward. Seeing Ghislain's fighting actions, Bernaf was surprised and thought to himself that he heard young Master Ghislain was all talk and no skill, but it seemed he was no rookie. Bernaf said this, puzzled by the density of mana Ghislain emitted. Hearing Amelia egging him on to bring her Ghislain's head if Bernaf truly felt worthy of being her sword, Bernaf increased the dense mana aura on his body while telling Ghislain to come forward. But because Ghislain said a knight escort was not worthy of giving a nobleman orders, Bernaf unhesitatingly charged with all his might, using a lightning-fast thrust technique, so fast that Ghislain was very surprised to see his speed. Fortunately, Ghislain was still able to parry with his sword and lean his body to the right, but his left cheek was grazed from the attack. Instantly, a fierce mechanical clash between sword masters ensued, with a blind exchange of attacks. Seeing this, Amelia broke into a cold sweat and thought to herself how Ghislain, known as a scoundrel, could keep up with Bernaf. She was still anxiously wondering whether her guard could still win or not, when one of Bernaf's sword thrusts was successfully blocked and locked by the handguard. Ghislain launched a counter thrust, which Bernaf impressively still managed to dodge by leaning his body and raising his hand. Once again, Bernaf locked Ghislain's sword with his left arm to launch a merciless counter thrust. Seeing that, Ghislain dodged with the same move, a rolling leap to unleash a spinning kick, but this time Ghislain was taken by surprise because Bernaf mercilessly slammed him hard onto the floor, saying that the same trick wouldn't work twice. Before Ghislain could even get up from the very painful fall, Bernaf mercilessly launched a downward sword thrust to finish him. But impressively, even in such a desperate situation, Ghislain still managed to kick the base of Bernaf's sword to make the thrust miss behind him. As Bernaf's sword stuck into the floor, Ghislain backflipped to create distance. Ghislain thought to himself, wondering if Bernaf had reinforced his left arm with mana just now. Seeing Ghislain's swordsmanship so far, Bernaf admitted that Ghislain was far different from what was rumored. It was very much in line with the saying, "Don't believe it until you see it for yourself." He remarked that his swordsmanship didn't seem to be learned systematically, looking more like real-world combat experience. He wondered if Ghislain had fought against barbarians so often that he adopted their fighting style. He stated that this method might work on a chaotic battlefield, but it wouldn't work on him, and that this was the end of Ghislain's life. Bernaf said this while throwing Ghislain's sword behind him and preparing for his next attack. Seeing this, Ghislain was quite tense, breaking into a sweat. He had expected the fight against Bernaf to be difficult. The narrow and precise thrust from Bernaf's sword which constantly aimed for his head, messed up his calculations of distance and timing. Moreover, in close-quarters combat, the difference in size and body weight made it difficult for Ghislain to prevail by relying on technique alone. From the beginning, Ghislain knew that Bernaf was not an opponent he could face. Of course, that was referring to ordinary sword techniques. Realizing he didn't have much time to strengthen himself to face such a danger, Ghislain, without hesitation, now activated his mana threads to pull the sword that was behind Bernaf, which quite surprised the guard. Before Bernaf's surprise faded, Ghislain pulled the sword with all his might, and its hilt struck the back of Bernaf's head, causing him great pain. Just as Bernaf staggered forward, Ghislain leaped forward with lightning speed, stepping on Bernaf's right thigh as a support to deliver a knee kick that hit the guard's face with great force, sending his head flying backward. While Bernaf was still in shock from what had happened, and Amelia was panicking at seeing her personal guard injured, Ghislain had already caught the sword in his hand to launch a full-power downslash, which Bernaf impressively still managed to block with his sword supported by both hands. Not stopping there, Bernaf pushed his sword hard, sending Ghislain flying backward. Realizing that Ghislain was no ordinary fighter, Bernaf told Amelia to leave the room immediately. He couldn't even guarantee her safety in this situation. While strengthening the mana aura in his body, Bernaf stated firmly that from now on, he would use his full abilities. Hearing that, Ghislain wasn't panicked at all. Instead, he replied that was what he had hoped for, and that it had been a long time since he had faced such an entertaining enemy. Meanwhile, Amelia herself rushed to the front door to check who had leaked information about the Merchant Guild to Ghislain. She was sure someone must have leaked it, otherwise, Ghislain couldn't have known such details. Honestly, Amelia was still shocked by Ghislain's current abilities, considering that before this, he was a nobody, incapable of doing anything. And when Amelia arrived at the front door, she was horrified to see the guards lying on the floor, unclear if they were dead or alive, as there was no blood spilled. Standing in the midst of the fallen guards was a mysterious figure. It turned out to be Belinda, Ghislain Perdium's personal maid. When Belinda greeted Amelia, saying it had been a long time, Amelia's eyes widened, and she asked why the Perdium maid was there. Just as Amelia asked, in the blink of an eye, Belinda was suddenly behind her, pressing a dagger to her neck, causing Amelia's breath to catch. Belinda deliberately pulled a spider from Amelia's mouth, remarking how she was still carrying this disgusting spider. Belinda said she still remembered the incident at the engagement ceremony, where she overheard a conversation between Count Rayfold and her lord. She mentioned that Amelia's brother had placed a scary spider near her, but Amelia raised that spider for revenge. Belinda wasn't sure if that was a way of facing trauma or a form of self-defense, but she apologized for her attitude, stating that spiders did not suit the lady. Belinda then dropped the spider to the floor and crushed it, asking if Amelia was willing to cooperate. Back to Ghislain and Bernaf's fight. Seeing the mana radiating from Bernaf, Ghislain acknowledged that the air around them was tense due to the immense overflow of mana. However, Bernaf was puzzled by Ghislain's earlier words, thinking that calling an opponent entertaining sounded like something a low-class mercenary would say. He questioned how a nobleman like Ghislain could act like a mercenary, to which Ghislain replied that, of course, he was a nobleman. Besides, a guard knight like Bernaf had no right to question the attitude of nobles. Annoyed by this, Bernaf instantly lunged forward with a lightning-fast sword slash, which Ghislain managed to block. While delivering a flurry of reckless thrusts, Bernaf shouted that young Master Ghislain should not bring shame upon the nobility. Faced with this, Ghislain had to exert all his defensive skills to parry or dodge the relentless barrage of sword thrusts. Ghislain's cloak began to tear as he narrowly avoided Bernaf's attacks. While continuously defending and being forced backward, Ghislain thought to himself that this man was pushing him ferociously. Ghislain shouted that it was enough, parrying Bernaf's sword to the side, then unhesitatingly unleashed a counter overhead slash straight at Bernaf's face. Impressively, Bernaf was able to maneuver his sword with lightning speed, blocking Ghislain's surprise attack with his handguard and deflecting the slash to destabilize Gislin's stance in an instant. Just as an opening was created and Gislin's eyes widened, Bernaf stated that this was Gislin's final attack. Bernaf then mercilessly thrust his sword. The thrust was completely unavoidable and unblockable, directly wounding Gislin's upper body and causing fresh blood to gush from the wound. But suddenly, it was Bernaf's eyes that widened in shock. He was stunned to see that Gislin had allowed himself to be injured, using his shoulder to deflect the attack. Without hesitation, Gislin launched another overhead slash, forcing Bernaf to parry it again. But Bernaf wouldn't let his guard down again. After pressing Gislin's sword down with his own, Bernaf delivered a powerful, mana-infused kick that landed squarely on Gislin's waist, sending him flying backward. Hearing Bernaf say that he was different from those who swing a sword for fun, and feeling the pain from the two recent attacks, Gislin thought to himself that fighting Bernaf was as entertaining as he expected. He acknowledged that Bernaf controlled the flow of the battle with his incredible speed, range, and consecutive attacks, and that any attempt at close-quarters grappling would be immediately shut down. He noted how in their exchanges, Bernaf made it seem as if their swords were locked together, tricking him into thinking they were inseparable. Gislin admitted that with his current mana level, he couldn't match Bernaf's power, but he was referring only to the mana he currently possessed. He found it shameful, but he knew he had to defeat him here, and that there was one thing Bernaf had overlooked: his unique mana cultivation technique. Seeing Bernaf charge again with a lightning-fast thrust, Gislin unhesitatingly detonated 3 mana cores at once. Instantly, Gislin burst forward with insane speed, perfectly parrying Bernaf's flash-like thrust and sending his sword flying far to the side. Bernaf stood frozen, his eyes wide, wondering how young Master Gislin could release so much mana during a fight. Just as an opening was created, Gislin mercilessly launched his ultimate sword thrust toward the helpless guard. Suddenly, a cry to stop was heard, causing Gislin to halt his thrust just before his sword pierced Bernaf's forehead. The one who shouted was Amelia, held captive by Belinda. Terrified and in tears, Amelia told him to take the 10,000 gold and leave. Hearing this, Gislin withdrew his sword from Bernaf's brow, for which a drop of blood trickled. He then approached Amelia, stating how troublesome this was and that she should have given him the money when he asked nicely. But he told Amelia that unfortunately, the price had now increased to 20,000 gold. With no other choice, Amelia was forced to comply with Gislin's demand without another word of protest. After Gislin left the Rayfold estate, a furious Amelia smashed a vase in front of her night guard. Seeing this, Bernaf immediately apologized. He said that Gislin was an incredibly strong individual, unlike the rumors. Still, Bernaf admitted it was his fault for not assessing Gislin correctly beforehand. Moreover, Gislin had momentarily emitted mana that surpassed that of an advanced knight. Hearing this, Amelia was finally convinced that Gislin had truly changed. When Bernaf asked if she would report this incident to Duke Delphine, Amelia slapped the guard hard across the face. She told him to watch his mouth, asking if he knew how terrifying Duke Delphine was. She explained that if the Duke found out about today's incident, they would be finished as well. The reason she had secretly allied with Duke Delphine without her father's knowledge was because of a secret agreement. The Duke would support her rebellion in exchange for her help in bringing down the Perdium family. She feared that if this was revealed, her brother would surely kill her, and if Gislin knew the secret of the Merchant Guild, he might also know about this deal. She concluded that they had to eliminate Gislin no matter what. Bernaf believed that now was the perfect time to eliminate Gislin, as he was quite seriously injured, had exhausted a lot of mana, and was not in peak condition. However, Bernaf didn't want to use Rayfold Knights to do the job, as it would leave a trail. Of course, Amelia knew this, which was why they had trained the Wildcats for moments like this. Upon hearing the name Wildcat, Bernaf instantly grew tense and broke into a cold sweat. The group, fully known as the Wildcat Traffickers, was composed of war orphans who had no relatives and no status. Only the most naturally talented specialists were among them. Pointing to a location on a map, Amelia ordered Bernaf to send the Wildcats there, choosing only those proficient in using mana. Bernaf immediately understood that the location was a narrow ravine, the only path from the Rayfold territory to Perdium. It was perfect for an ambush and assassination without anyone finding out. After Bernaf agreed to carry out the order, Amelia, filled with a burning vengeance, thought to herself that Ghislain would pay for the humiliation he had inflicted upon her with his life. Meanwhile, Ghislain was in a horse-drawn carriage with Fergus and Belinda, who were worried about his injuries. Ghislain said the wound he received wasn't too deep. He was lucky it was only his shoulder, even though he had overdone it a bit in the fight. Besides, the 20,000 gold he received from Amelia would be enough to cover the rebuilding costs of the Perdium territory, an amount that would have taken him several years to save. In his mind, Ghislain knew he could have eliminated Amelia, but war would surely have broken out if she had died. For now, he couldn't risk the security of the Perdium territory for a momentary desire. Since Perdium had already gone through hard times fighting the barbarians, it was only right for him to restrain himself for now. At the very least, Ghislain thought, the fact that he knew the secret of the Arctium Merchant Guild should be enough of a burden on Amelia. So, he intended to exploit that woman to the fullest. Seeing Ghislain sitting relaxed in the carriage, Belinda was puzzled and asked if everything in Rayfold had gone according to his plan. She asked if he hadn't told her to incapacitate the guards when she heard fighting inside and to capture Lady Amelia when she came out of her room. Just as Ghislain affirmed this, though he had actually intended for Fergus to do it, he suddenly felt an immense pain in his chest and coughed up a lot of blood. This was a side effect of opening his third mana core. It was better than what happened with Elena, but Ghislain was sure it would become a problem if he kept experiencing this every time he used his power. Just as he thought to himself that he needed to find a way to increase his mana quickly, a worried Belinda grabbed his left hand. After checking his pulse, Belinda said that the mana flow in his body was chaotic. Instantly, she activated the mana in her dagger and performed a kind of acupuncture technique around Ghislain's left palm. Ghislain immediately felt relief as the blocked mana pathways in his body opened up a little. Seeing this, Ghislain thought to himself that this was a method that couldn't be executed without a deep understanding of mana. He knew Belinda was no ordinary maid because his mother had brought her, but he wondered who she really was. Honestly, Ghislain didn't know why a skilled individual like Belinda would work as a head maid in the countryside. But he thought it was a good thing to have as many skilled individuals as possible in the Perdium territory. After all, the strong enemies he had encountered so far were just the beginning. That's why Ghislain intended to recruit more skilled people as soon as possible to strengthen the Perdium territory. Since Belinda was still curious why Ghislain went to the trouble of extorting so much money from Amelia, which could ruin the engagement, Ghislain finally revealed a part of his grand plan. With a serious face, Ghislain said he would pioneer development into the forest of monsters. Hearing this, Belinda and Fergus couldn't hide their shock. Fergus firmly forbade it, because developing that area had been attempted 3 times since Ghislain's great-grandfather's era, and all had ended in failure. But Ghislain just asked with a sharp gaze if old man Fergus remembered his request before they entered the Rayfold estate. Breaking into a cold sweat, Fergus replied that the person he was asked to find was indeed at the location he mentioned, but he questioned if Ghislain was sure about that person, as their condition was quite concerning. Ghislain said that as long as the person was still alive, it didn't matter, and they should go there immediately. Belinda objected, considering Ghislain's current condition, but Ghislain reasoned that Amelia certainly wouldn't let him live and would send assassins to finish him off. Rather than forcing Fergus and Belinda to be pure fighters, it was better for Ghislain to recruit someone more suited to be an impenetrable frontline. And that was the person Ghislain desperately wanted to meet now. Not long after, Ghislain and his companions, including Ricardo, arrived at the designated place. It looked like an abandoned house. After knocking on the door for a long time, a tall, large old man finally came out. His hair and beard were messy, and his long eyebrows even covered his eyes. So when the old man asked who had come to his place, Fergus, Belinda, and Ricardo shuddered in fear, thinking the man must be crazy. Belinda quickly told Ghislaine that the old man couldn't possibly be the person he was looking for. She thought that far from fighting, in his condition, it was more likely he would be dead by tomorrow. But Ghislaine insisted that this was the right place. Knowing that a nobleman was visiting, as Fergus and Ricardo were wearing knight armor, the old man immediately went back inside, telling the young noble not to waste his time and to go away. But Ghislaine responded by telling him to wait, addressing him as Gillian, the former captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries, and saying he had been looking for him for a long time. This made the old man's eyes fly open, and Fergus and Ricardo were equally shocked. The Ratatosk mercenaries were a group that only accepted masters who had mastered almost all weapons. Although they were no longer active, their bravery was so renowned that every knight, even in foreign lands, had heard their name at least once. And the captain of that super elite group was Gillian, the man standing before Ghislaine now. Instead of being pleased that someone recognized him, Gillian suddenly threw his axe with speed and accuracy, landing it beside Ghislaine as a threat not to mess with him. Of course, Belinda and the others were shocked to see their master threatened like that. Gillian then spoke firmly, projecting a dense mana throughout his body, acknowledging that Ghislaine knew him and demanding to be told his purpose. Seeing Gillian's intimidation, Belinda and the others immediately raised their weapons to protect their master. But suddenly, Ghislaine uttered two words, eternal punishment, which stunned Gillian completely. Ghislaine continued, saying he knew how to cure the disease his daughter was suffering from and asked if that interested him. A little about eternal punishment. A person afflicted with this disease suffers from high fever, vomits blood, and develops red spots that bloom like flower petals on their skin. The patient screams hysterically and writhes in pain, like a prisoner being punished, leading everyone to believe the disease is incurable. Finally, Gillian led Ghislaine and his party into the house, where his daughter, Rachel, was screaming ceaselessly, with blood spattered everywhere. Although Rachel looked like she was hopelessly dying, Ghislaine knew it wasn't too late. In the past, Ghislaine had tried to find Gillian to recruit him, but he was already dead when Ghislaine found him. At that time, Gillian had given up on everything and ended his own life after Rachel died. From what Ghislaine could see of the house's condition, it was clear that Gillian had sold all his assets for Rachel's treatment, except for the weapons that were his identity as a mercenary. Seeing Rachel roaring in agony, even begging her father to just let her die, Ghislaine took off his jacket and said he would begin the treatment. When Belinda protested that Ghislaine didn't need to sacrifice so much for a disease that even priests couldn't cure, Ghislaine insisted he could cure it. By simply asking Belinda to trust him as promised, the maid fell silent, and Ghislaine handed her a piece of paper, telling her to buy all the herbs listed on it. When Belinda read the paper, her eyebrows shot up. She couldn't believe Ghislaine was this prepared. In fact, as a wandering mercenary without a home in the past, Ghislaine had gathered all the knowledge needed for survival. While eternal punishment was an incurable disease in the present time, its cure would be discovered in the future. In the past, this cure became a hot topic due to its very simple method. The only problem was the high cost of the ingredients, especially Fairy's Blessing. After obtaining all the ingredients and mixing them into a small bottle, Ghislaine told Gillian to give the concoction to Rachel. Just as Gillian lovingly gave the medicine to his daughter, the red spots on her body instantly faded. Rachel stopped screaming and was even able to sleep peacefully. Everyone there stared with wide eyes, unable to believe Ghislaine's potion was so effective. But Gillian asked Ghislaine how he did it, when even divine power couldn't cure his daughter. Ghislaine replied that a priest's divine power wasn't actually that strong. Divine power only increases a body's vitality and strengthens regeneration to help overcome illness. Ghislaine's potion was far different from the basic healing of priests. Hearing this, Gillian's hands trembled uncontrollably. The hope that had nearly vanished now shone brightly in his heart again. Kneeling before Ghislaine and holding both his arms, Gillian as a loving father, asked with a trembling voice if his daughter could truly be cured. Ghislain replied loudly that he guaranteed his daughter would be fully recovered within a few months. Those words of confirmation shook Gillian's heart with hope, and he immediately knelt to declare a soldier's loyalty. Gillian asked what Ghislain wanted from him, assuming he had traveled so far because he needed something. He said that he only had his useless body, but if Ghislain wanted him to be his dog or his slave, he would do it. Ghislain replied that he didn't need a slave. What he needed was Gillian, the captain of the Ratatosk mercenaries. He extended his hand to accept the oath of loyalty. Looking into Ghislain's eyes, Gillian knew instantly that Ghislain was a true leader with the eyes of a dreamer. And so, Gillian agreed to join as a captain under Ghislain, starting by symbolically cutting his long hair, a sign that he was ready to return to the battlefield. Belinda and the others were stunned by Gillian's new appearance. From a disheveled madman, he had transformed into a terrifying war general. But suddenly, Gillian walked over to his weapon storage in the corner of the room. He then asked Ghislain if anyone besides him and his group had come here or was looking for him. Ghislain replied that it was just them, but when Gillian asked if anyone else held a grudge against Ghislain, he affirmed it, adding that many more people would hold grudges against him in the future. Hearing this, Gillian picked up a spear wrapped with a rope and suddenly, without warning, he threw it with all his might. It pierced through the house wall and shot like a missile toward a target outside. As the spear impaled the target, Gillian mercilessly pulled the rope, brutally dragging the figure, who had a spear stuck in their chest, from a distance into the house. Gillian then grabbed the target's neck and asked fiercely who sent them. Since the cat-masked figure was just shocked and didn't answer, Gillian asked Ghislain what he wanted to do with them. Of course, Ghislain already knew who had sent the cat-masked person and was ready to draw his sword for the execution. But Gillian immediately stopped him, asking to handle the matter himself. With just a squeeze of his hand, the cat-masked person's neck was crushed, killing them gruesomely on the spot. Although Belinda was uneasy seeing Gillian take a life without hesitation and wondered why her young master would recruit such a dangerous person, Gillian's loyalty was unquestionable. Once again, Gillian knelt before Ghislain and declared that from this moment on, he, Gillian, swore his loyalty to young Master Ghislain Perdium, and his life was in Ghislain's hands. With that, Ghislain had now secured an ace for his future reconstruction plans. In a short time, news of the Wildcat Scouts' deaths reached the main unit in the nearby forest, throwing them into shock and uproar. Vigo, commander of the Wildcat traffickers, grew angry at his subordinate's commotion. Based on Bernafa's information, he insisted that Ghislain should not even have the ability to track the scouts, so it made no sense that he had wiped them out. But when a subordinate reported that Gillian had joined Ghislain's group, Vigo jolted and seized the man by the throat, demanding to know if it was true. The subordinate, voice strangled, affirmed that he had seen it with his own eyes. Hearing that, Vigo smiled broadly and thought to himself that Gillian had finally begun to move his former commander. Meanwhile, Ghislain and his group were traveling by horse-drawn caravan with Gillian as driver. Because Gillian had crammed the wagon with weapons, Ghislain had to rent another caravan so Rachel could ride comfortably under the guard of Fergus and Ricardo. Seeing Belinda annoyed at all the gear Gillian brought, Ghislain told her to be patient, since their top priority now was getting safely out of the narrow Rayfold Gorge. After hearing Ghislain say he was sure the spy who had died earlier had been sent by Amelia, Belinda honestly worried that this would complicate matters. From his mask, she knew the spy belonged to the Wildcat traffickers. As far as she knew, the Wildcats wielded major influence in Rayfold, especially in large-scale crimes ranging from smuggling and assassination to narcotics and human trafficking, plus other dirty work. She judged them disgusting trash, and worse, armed and backed by highly skilled former mercenaries. Ghislain, of course, was surprised that Belinda knew so much despite always being in the castle. Belinda deflected that she had heard many rumors before working as a maid in Perdium Castle. In any case, since the Wildcats were a guild that knew no fear, she urged Ghislaine to be extra careful. Instead of fretting, Ghislaine assured her that everything would be fine as long as Gillian stayed with them. Belinda's fear came true when the ground around the running caravan suddenly heaved and chased like fast slithering snakes. Gillian started as two mounds rose on either side, and from them 2 assassins sprang, leaping high to kill him. Remarkably, Gillian parried and locked both thrusts with a single axe in his right hand and a sword in his left. With a powerful swing of the axe, he severed the right assassin's arm, while simultaneously cutting down the one on the left in the same arc, then split the right assassin's head with the next heavy blow. Before he could drive the caravan clear, other Wildcat troops cut ropes to drop a trap of huge timbers onto the wagon, forcing Gillian to halt the horses at once. In an instant, Ghislaine's caravan was surrounded by the Wildcats and their commander, Vigo. Vigo stepped forward, heated the air by drawing a dagger from his belt, and declared that Gillian, the former commander of the Ratatosk mercenaries, was a coward who had disbanded his force just for the sake of a girl. Gillian got down from the wagon and stated that he had no idea what the enemy commander was talking about. Vigo retorted that because of Gillian he had been forced into a life he had never wanted, and he asked whether Gillian had grown so senile he no longer remembered his former subordinates. Annoyed by Gillian's indifference, Vigo immediately ordered 3 men to kill him. Yet with a single spinning sweep of his heavy axe, Gillian hacked off the limbs of the 3 charging Wildcats and killed them on the spot. The next waves met the same fate, cut to pieces by Gillian's ferocious dual-axe assault before they could land a single blow. Seeing this, Vigo fell silent and thought that, just as he had suspected, Gillian's prowess as a mercenary was as formidable as ever. But he then ordered his men to spread out and pressure Gillian from both flanks. Gillian, impressively, felt no pressure at all. He unhitched a horse from the caravan, mounted, and charged, startling the Wildcats. Without hesitation, he unleashed a 2-handed, aura-laced axe cleave that cut down several of them at once. The survivors panicked and tried to target the horse from all sides, but with a full 360-degree sweep of dense aura, he shredded them in a single motion, blood spattering the ground and making Belinda shudder. The scene was reminiscent of Lu Bu from the Dynasty Warriors games. Once his troops lay dead, Vigo leaped at Gillian's back for a sudden dagger strike, but Gillian swiftly turned and caught the stab on his shield. While the blade stuck in the shield, Vigo stated that because Gillian had ruined his life, Gillian should not be standing in his way. He vowed to finish him there, and then produced 3 kunai in his left hand, hurling them mercilessly at the horse's neck to kill it. As Gillian sprang from his fallen mount, Vigo stabbed lightning fast for his head, but Gillian perfectly parried with his axe and followed with a brutal shield-edge slam to Vigo's waist that hurled him back in pain. Gillian firmly declared that he was no longer Ratatosk's captain, which infuriated Vigo. Vigo snapped that Gillian should stop spouting nonsense and demanded to know, if not him, then who? Gillian answered that he had cast away his past and was now no one, nothing but young Master Ghislaine's subordinate, while he poured more mana into his axe. Unable to stand it any longer, Vigo lunged with all his might, shouting that he would kill him. Their duel, 2 former Ratatosk mercenaries, grew increasingly fierce. Vigo's speed and thrust with both sword and dagger were met by Gillian's flawless shield defense. When the dagger lodged in the shield again, Vigo reiterated that after Gillian left, their mercenary group had collapsed. Because of him, he had lost his purpose and been forced into a miserable life. Gillian ignored the words. After another shield bash to drive Vigo back, Gillian loosed a wide axe swing that Vigo narrowly avoided by leaning back. Then Vigo launched a high left kick counter, which Gillian again blocked with his shield. Unfortunately, the wooden shield finally shattered under the onslaught he had been absorbing. Vigo went on that he had been willing to sacrifice his life to make Ratatosk the best, but now Gillian had thrown it all away to serve a pampered noble. He shouted that he would never forgive him, hurling 3 mana-hardened kunai with all his strength, only for Gillian to deflect them easily with his axe. The high-level exchange continued at blistering speed. Vigo felt certain his skill now surpassed Gillian's, since he had fought non-stop while Gillian had been busy caring for his daughter. He suddenly leaped toward one of the previously deflected kunai and, without hesitation, kicked it hard so it streaked at Gillian, forcing him to catch it on his shoulder armor. In that instant, Vigo had already closed in for a surprise rush. Gillian countered at once with a sweeping axe strike. Even so, Vigo evaded by jumping upward and, while descending, drove a full-power dagger thrust down at him, shouting that this would be the end. Suddenly, Gillian caught the full-power dagger with his mana-hardened left hand. He asked if that was the reason Vigo sought revenge on him. Vigo's eyes widened as he realized internally that Gillian had coated his hand with mana and blocked the strike barehanded, meaning he hadn't even been fighting seriously from the start. Gillian then slammed the axe but hard into Vigo's face, hurling him back into a tree with crushing force. Gillian approached the writhing Vigo and said he didn't understand. If Vigo truly wanted revenge, he had had plenty of chances, so why hadn't he acted from the start? Vigo laughed darkly and retorted that Gillian knew only half the story. He had tracked down Gillian's former residence, but the captain of Ratatosk hadn't been there. Only a weak old man, not even worth killing. He demanded to know where the Gillian he had idolized had gone, which left Gillian silent for a moment. Gillian tossed the dagger back at his feet and stated that, though he was bound by another's will, he would, for this moment, honor his old comrade as best he could, as the captain of Ratatosk, now taking a sword in his left hand. Satisfied by those words, Vigo snatched up the dagger and charged full force, his blade and Gillian's sword clashing violently. Fired up, he shouted that this was what he truly wanted while launching barrage after barrage that Gillian met flawlessly. Counters and guards traded back and forth until Gillian's sword finally sank deep into Vigo's right flank, making him cry out and vomit blood. Even so, Vigo refused to yield and still managed a counterswing with the dagger, which Gillian easily avoided. Before delivering the finishing blow with his axe, Gillian stated firmly that he would always remember Vigo, Ratatosk's 5th commander, Vigo Bolanos. The words drew Vigo's final, unregretful smile. He was glad Gillian still remembered him, even though he died drenched in blood moments later by Gillian's hand. As a memento, Gillian even collected all of Vigo's weapons and kept them as a mark of respect for a fellow Ratatosk comrade. With Gillian's solo slaughter of all the Wildcat traffickers complete, Ghislain admitted that Gillian's skill far exceeded his expectations. In his heart, Ghislain reflected that back when he had first left home and become a mercenary, tales of Gillian from his seniors had helped lay the groundwork for his own rise as a mercenary king, and that moving quickly had been the right call because it had gained him a reliable ally. 2 days passed. Ghislain's party finally reached the Per Diem domain. When Ghislain remarked that Per Diem looked like trash, houses dilapidated, fields empty because everyone had been conscripted, Gillian responded that Per Diem had always clashed with northern barbarians, so mass conscription was natural. Yet, seeing it firsthand, he had not expected the situation to be this bad. Ghislain then declared that he would solve all of Per Diem's problems, provided Gillian would help him. With firm resolve, Ghislain vowed internally that this would be a long fight, to sever everything tied to Duke Delphine and protect what had been taken for granted, and that he would revive the territory no matter what. But at the castle gate, the whole party, Ghislain included, was startled to find his father waiting with the sharp gaze of a wolf. Ghislain was summoned to a council of Per Diem's upper officials. There he heard Commander of the Knights Randolph, Treasurer Albert, and Chief Administrator Homer fiercely debate cutting the number of knightly orders to reallocate funds for rebuilding the border posts in the Monster Forest, posts nearly destroyed by the last Orc raid, made worse by Rayfold's recent reduction of aid to Per Diem. Their stubbornness in their respective positions honestly irritated Ghislain, since even when Per Diem had been ruined in the past, they had been the same. Not wanting to become a buzzing nuisance in the meeting, Ghislain greeted his father and thanked him for his hard work on the recent expedition. Count Per Diem, Zwalter Per Diem, responded only with a non-committal murmur. Without the slightest smile, which reminded Ghislain of how he had hated his father's strict stiffness as a child. Now he understood. It was natural that his father was always tense, burdened by the countless responsibilities and exhaustion of Lord. Knowing Ghislain had caused trouble during his absence, Zwalter asked whether it was true that Ghislain had executed Jamal and Philip when they tried to sell Elena. Before Ghislain could answer, Randolph interjected that Ghislain could not possibly have killed both. At most, he must have delivered the final blow after they had grievously wounded each other. Ghislain simply agreed with Randolph, not wishing to stir friction with the Knight Commander. Suddenly Zwalter said that Ghislain had done well, that regardless of the process, the important thing was that Elena was safe, leaving Ghislain stunned, as it was the first praise he had ever heard from his father. He seized the moment to request a reward, which Per Diem's officials opposed because of his past misbehavior. But when Ghislain said he wanted only permission to develop the monster forest, all the officials, including his father, fell into shocked anger, wondering what madness the boy would attempt next after all his previous antics. Ghislain returned to his room and told Belinda and Gillian that his father had refused him permission to go to the monster forest. He ignored Belinda's scolding and instead asked Gillian whether he had heard the plan from her. Gillian replied that he knew Ghislain intended to develop the monster forest with funds received from the Princess of Rayfold. He explained that no one returned alive from that forest. Thus, everyone avoided it, and no one knew the current state within. He added that its horrors were known even to other counties, which pleased Ghislain to hear. No matter how many times Belinda nagged that his father hadn't granted permission, Ghislain did not care. He would go regardless, and asking beforehand had only been a courtesy. Naturally, Belinda wondered why he was so obsessed with going. He intentionally kept it secret, since if word got out now, it would cause him great trouble. In truth, if he succeeded, they would earn a fortune from rune stones buried not far from the forest's edge. Rare, mana-bearing minerals that drove mages crazy, usable for all kinds of magical apparatus from barriers and magic circles to scrolls, and crucial to alchemy, magical research, and anything involving mana. In Ghislain's previous life, those rune stones had been discovered by Count Delphine, but for now only he knew. With no other choice, Belinda decided to trust that he had planned everything. After Belinda agreed to help, Ghislain asked her to hire 200 mercenaries for the monster forest expedition. Gillian initially objected, noting that mercenaries were rough and hard to control. Handling 200 at once would be extremely difficult, and they might even turn on their employer and devour him. Ghislain acknowledged that, which was why they had to recruit the most useful mercenaries in the north, the best of the best. Hearing this, Gillian broke into a cold sweat, realizing Ghislain meant the mad dogs of the north, the Cerberus mercenaries. Soon, Ghislain and Gillian reached the outskirts of Zimbar, the Cerberus mercenaries' territory. A scout mercenary initially dismissed them, and given Ghislain's noble appearance, they were sure they could ransom him for a hefty sum. But in a blink, Gillian seized the scout by the head at the front gate and slammed him hard before the others, shocking and enraging them. The mercenaries immediately surrounded Gillian in battle readiness. A ranking mercenary wielding a chain flail stepped forward and stated that from the looks of it, this man was a high-ranking noble, and that regardless of status, he could not barge in like this, warning that he should not expect to leave alive. The words did not daunt Ghislain on his horse. He shot back with a sharp glare, demanding to know who their commander was. Irritated, the flail wielder hurled his weapon at Ghislain's head, but Gillian neatly caught the chain between links with his sword. All the mercenaries, including the flail user, stared in shock. Since they still refused to heed Ghislain's words, he told Gillian to do whatever he liked as long as he didn't kill them. In moments, Gillian piled the flail user and several attackers into a heap before they could react, and for the rest, he needed only a cold, crushing glare to make them shiver in fear. Tired of waiting, Ghislain dismounted and firmly demanded they call their commander. The commander soon appeared, stating that he had been enjoying a nap before being disturbed. He introduced himself as Kair, commander of the Cerberus mercenaries, and asked what business had brought them. Short-haired and respected by all his subordinates, he initially traded heated words over how his men had been treated, but because Ghislain said he had a serious request, Kair agreed to hear him at the conference table. Inside the tent, Ghislain said he wanted to hire Cerberus to open a path into the monster forest, a request that shocked and stirred Kair's subordinates. They grew even more surprised, even laughing openly, when they learned their visitor was Ghislain per Diem, the notorious wild noble's son. Kair firmly stated that the pampered noble clearly had no idea what the monster forest was like, that the place wasn't for a spoiled kid like him, and that their negotiation was over, signaling his men to attack. Ghislain responded by asking whether Kair was afraid, noting that he had heard the group was skilled, and wondering if that was just exaggerated rumor. The taunt startled and angered Kair, who propped both feet on the table and said that the boy shouldn't be cocky. As Ghislain himself had noted, they were mercenaries, and they did not take jobs unless the price matched the risk. Ghislain kept provoking him, saying that weak people always made excuses for everything. Kair said his mood was foul. He had thought to toy with Ghislain, but the boy's amateurish provocation was beneath him. In Kair's view, a kid like Ghislain who didn't know how the world worked wasn't even worth killing. He was willing to let Ghislain leave alive if he paid compensation. Ghislain, however, declared that it would not happen and challenged Kair, commander of Cerberus, to a Moriana's recognition. The entire tent, even Gillian, was shocked by the declaration. Kair asked whether Ghislain understood what he had just said. Ghislain, of course, understood Moriana's recognition, a traditional mercenary duel in which, once agreed, both participants fought with a single dagger and no mana while their arms were bound together. Leaving the small fighting circle also counted as defeat. It was a brutal fight for survival within restricted space and movement, and in many cases both winner and loser died. Fully aware of the challenge, Ghislain told Kair that the loser had to acknowledge defeat and obey the winner's orders completely, becoming, in effect, the winner's dog, and asked what he thought. Gillian broke into a cold sweat. He had not expected a noble youth like Ghislain to know such a filthy mercenary tradition. In the mercenary world, refusing a Moriana challenge was equivalent to admitting weakness, so Kair clearly couldn't turn it down. Hearing Ghislain's terms, Kair chuckled and told his comrades that their noble guest seemed to want recognition the mercenary way, asking if they wouldn't gladly accept it, drawing matching laughter from his men. Moments later, Kair and Ghislain stood outside the tent within the circle, left hands bound together, daggers in their right. The mercenaries cheered, certain their commander would teach the arrogant noble a lesson, perhaps kill him easily. Hearing the roar, Kair pulled Ghislain closer and said he seemed to be hiding tricks and thought he could attack without fear and that he could no longer back out now. He added that he'd done this 5 times and won them all. Annoyed by the condescension, Ghislain tugged him closer in return and replied that if Kair had done it 5 times, he himself had won it hundreds of times. Words that made Kair's eyes widen.